Today we're going to talk about setting limits, which are not always easy. Come on in, make yourself at home here. So let's talk about first, what are boundaries? When we talk about limits and we talk about boundaries, what are we talking about? So what do you think boundaries are?
Knowing what line to cross, don't step in that person's bubble.
Uh-huh.
A bubble that they don't need to overstep.
Yeah, everybody has a bubble, and that could be a physical space bubble. It could be all kinds of different things, right? What else? Anything else that comes to mind as far as limits? The invisible barrier between you and other people. That could be emotional barriers. That could be physical barriers. An imaginary line that you're not willing to let others cross. Limits defining acceptable behavior. Limits based on needs. And then the question of whose need is it? So one of the things that I think is really important in all of our professions is self-awareness about what are our lines, what are maybe some of the things that are triggering what limits that we feel sometimes are crossed, or why we are determined that person is not going to cross that line. Those are all things that's really important to kind of keep in mind. So we're going to kind of go through all of those as we go along. So the whose need is it? Because sometimes we have this and we're like, you may not do this thing, right? And really, what? I mean, if they do that thing, what does that mean? Or is that my need to just hold that down? Is there a real reason? Those are the kinds of things that we're going to talk some more about. So let's talk about challenges to barriers. When you set limits with somebody, what are the challenges to keeping those limits set? Consistency. Tell me more about that.
Well, for us, like one shift to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm. One shift to the other, or even nurse to nurse from day to day, upholding the same limits. Absolutely. What else? Consequences. You mean the follow through with it? Yeah, absolutely. What else? What are the challenges that you guys find? How about in the school setting? What are challenges to limit setting for you guys? Teenagers test limits? No. Right? Yeah, totally. And a lot of adults who have teenage mentality. What'd you say? So do college students. Yep. So do a lot of adults that we know sometimes. Yeah. What else? Anything else? So when we think about challenges, these are some of the things that we have kind of come up. Sometimes people are just not motivated, or they don't care about the limit that you just set, right? They're like, so what, right? Predetermined outcome. Well, it doesn't matter whether I do that thing or not. You've already got you've already decided what's going to happen, right? Have we heard that before? Excuse me. Cognitive impairments. Sometimes literally somebody's physical or emotional or cognitive ability does not allow them to meet the needs of what it is that the limit that we are setting. Staff inconsistencies, we talked about that. Enforceability or accountability. Sometimes we say, don't do this thing or else, yada, 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 but really we can't enforce the yada, yada, yada part, right? No follow through, not personalized. How many of us have policies that are or have like, if this happens, then this happens, but that doesn't really fit in your particular situation, or you need accommodations? Sometimes that happens, and so sometimes we need to personalize it to an individual. If we don't have a time frame, or misplaced need. So how do we minimize those? What are some ideas to minimize some of those challenges that you guys talked about? Clear expectations. Mm-hmm. What else? Mm-hmm. Communicate the boundaries to other staff. Yeah, there's all kinds of different ways that we do that too, or at least we're trying to. Written, verbal, report. How do you guys communicate limits that you set in a school setting?
Proactive in communicating, what our expectations are.
Mm-hmm. To the kids and to each other, or?
To the
Very good. Yeah, to the staff that you work with. Good. Good. What other ways? What are some other things that you can do to minimize the challenges that we have on this side? Yeah.
Just good follow-up.
Good follow-up. Yeah.
Follow through.
Yeah.
Say what you do.
Uh-huh. And one of those things, too, I think, is making sure that we find that balance between whatever the policy says and being able to customize to the person that's sitting in front of us, because the person sitting in front of us is not a cookie-cutter person. You know, the way that we talk to them, the things that they need, sometimes we need to change that just a little bit to be able to be effective, you know, to hold that line. So identify rewards. Seek a common goal. Address fears and concerns. You know, explain what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. Address those individual challenges, prove accountability, you know, do what you say you're going to do. You know, all of this has to do with human communication, right? How much of our life is human communication, some of the difficulty, right? We struggle with that in not just work life. I mean, I'm sure many of us have relationships. Sometimes human communication is a part of that too. So who do we set limits with, right? One of the things that we need to make sure that we identify is the right person to set a limit with. So if you have a patient or if you have a student who is behaving appropriately, who is doing the things that you ask, who is taking initiative, obviously we're not going to set hard limits with that person, right? So tell me about a kind of person that you're going to set limits with in your particular situation or your particular group of people that you are with on a day-to-day basis. Who do you set limits with? Describe them for me.
We always don't set limits with inappropriate patients.
Okay, inappropriate in what kind of way?
Who know what they're doing and who are being sexually appropriate, physically inappropriate, verbally inappropriate.
Sexually, physically, verbally inappropriate people. Yes. Yes. What else?
Manipulative people.
Manipulative people. Yes. We have a lot of those, that they know exactly what it is that they're doing and exactly how to push your buttons. Absolutely. Who else?
Non-compliant.
Non-compliant patients or folks. Yes, absolutely. Anybody else? So we're going to set limits here in the hospital, and mind you, we kind of wrote this up for more of a patient-centered, but it applies all over the place. So agitated, controlling, manipulative, demanding, disrespectful, or habitual line steppers. You know, those folks that say, I don't care what line you just said, my 18-month-old likes to do that, right? You know, she looks at me and she's like, you wanted me to do what? You know? Yeah. So these are the folks that we set limits with. And that's important so that we, again, keep ourselves in check. So we're setting limits for the right people at the right time for the right reasons. You know, because if we get enough times when we set limits with folks and dig our heels in and it's not the appropriate time or the appropriate person, then we can lose credibility too. So we have to be cautious about that. I've said many times, when you're dating, you teach that person how to treat you, right? You say, this is what my expectations are. Being in the hospital is no different, or being in a workplace is no different. We have to teach the people that we work with what our lines are. You don't get to talk to me that way. We've had our nursing assistants or our care companions who the things that people say to them, like, you would never let somebody say that to you outside. I myself have been called some really things that you don't generally call a chaplain. We'll just put it that way, right? And so we have to set those lines to teach people how to treat us, what we are going to accept and what we're not going to accept. And we have to give yourself permission. One of the things that I think sometimes that we struggle with, especially in the healthcare industry, but also when dealing with kids, is we're like, oh, it's okay. I'm just trying to help them. We kind of excuse that behavior in some ways. But it is okay to set a boundary. It is okay to say no. It is okay to say, today is the day that I'm going to put myself first, because you have to. You have to. You have to respect yourself, and in teaching somebody how to respect you, you respect yourself. and you teach them how to respect themselves. You know, you have to put yourself first. If you are not safe, and I'm not just talking about physical safety, I'm talking about emotional safety, I'm talking about physical safety as well, and bodily safety. You know, yeah, I mean, we have to make sure that we are safe in order to take care of the people that are entrusted with us. How many of you do self-care on a regular basis? Yeah? How many of you are like, I suck at self-care, right? We have a few of those? Okay, very good. We're going to talk about self-care for just a second. What are some things that you do for self-care? We can talk about all of the things, okay? There's no judgment here about anything. What are some of the things that you do for self-care? Exercise. Okay. What else? Vacation and taking time off. Very good. Very good. What else? Shopping. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Retail therapy. Absolutely. What else? Alone time. Okay. What's another one?
Developing good friendships that are supportive.
That's good. Yeah. People that you can talk to. You know, I was just talking with a group last night about finding a person that you can share about your day, that gets it, that gets you, that you don't have to explain all that stuff about, but that you can have somebody that you can share with. Absolutely. Absolutely. Did you have one back there?
I'm just going to say, learn to say no.
Learn to say no. That's a good one. Yeah. There's another one. I know. Wine. Yes, 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 right? Coping skills, right? As long as you have a good balance, right? Good self-care, you know, it's important. It's very important. And when you take care of yourself, then you are able to take care of the people that are around you. The other really important part, and I love that you tapped on that, is gathering support, right? If you are dealing with a difficult situation, you are dealing with something that, again, I talked about self-awareness. If your self-awareness is telling you, oh my gosh, this guy is getting to me, you know, it is going to affect your behavior of that patient. And I will tell you, it's going to, because as somebody who knows myself pretty well, I know that. And sometimes I'm like, that guy or my spouse gets to me really bad, you know, and we need to just step back and allow somebody else or somebody, you know, something else to get in the way for a little while. So we need to gather support. We need to know who our team is, who our resources are, so that if we need to take a step back, we can do that. Part of one of the things, part of my life is I'm actually a chaplain for the Omaha Police Department as well. And sometimes the officers talk about that. My husband's also a correctional officer for Douglas County Jail. And sometimes those guys that come in, they just hit those buttons, right? And sometimes it takes a buddy to say, hey, it's somebody else's turn, you know? So we need that sometimes too, with patients, with students, you know. And sometimes we need just another voice to say, hey, you're doing the right thing. Keep at it. Keep at it. You're doing a good job, you know? We need to make sure that we set limits when we are feeling anger, rage, fear, disappointment, frustration. Again, it goes back to self-awareness too. You know, what is going on in here that I feel like I need to set a limit out there, right? Or if you are hearing things from somebody that is concerning, if you are disrespected, misrepresented, you know, no one deserves to be yelled at when you go to work. No one deserves to be hit when you go to work. No one deserves to be threatened when you go to work. That is not okay. It is not okay. And Methodist Hospital, and I'm sure I hope your other employers are saying that is not okay. And so we are talking today about how do we set limits to say to somebody, no, I'm sorry, you don't get to talk to me that way. You don't get to threaten me that way. That's not okay. So signs of unhealthy boundaries, right? So for our patients and our other folks, one of the things that we have to be cautious about too is patients who, or students or folks who don't have their own boundaries. So if they don't have boundaries, we have to be really cautious about setting our own boundaries too, to make sure that we hold that for them if they are not willing to do that for themselves or not able to do that for themselves. I've gone into a patient room before and they start telling me things that I do not want to know. There are parts of your life that should stay in part of your life. But if they are starting early intimacy, obviously we all know intimacy is not just sexual intimacy. It can be all kinds of parts of our lives. And sometimes when people tell all, they are trusting you, but sometimes it's inappropriate trust, right? Expecting others to fill their needs, right? We have patients all the time, who are just profoundly lonely, or there are students that just are seeking an adult to care about them. There are folks that need something, and that is not our job. We want to care, we want to provide compassion, but only to a certain extent, and we have to be cautious about that. With the chaplains, many times, we make really important and really deep connections with folks. And then they say, well, we're moving to Madonna. Can you come see us there? No, I can't. I can't see you there. You'll have to find the chaplain that's there. Or things like that, boundaries that we have to set for them if they're not willing to set for themselves. Pushing the limits, clingy behavior. You guys have seen this, How many of you have been in your business at least 10 to 15 years? Huh? Yeah. You guys know these patients. I'm sure that when we talk about these things, people pop into your minds, stories pop into your minds. And I love the fact that we are getting to a place where it's okay to say, you can set a boundary, and that's okay, and you can still do your job well and say no at the same time. Those are not mutually exclusive. So for our own selves, have you ever been preoccupied with a single patient or a single student that when you get home, they're still stuck in your brain? Have you ever had that happen? I had a patient one time that we were trying to figure out what to do. We're trying to figure out how to take care of this person the best. And I would get home and I would think about them, and it affects us. So that's when we have to be cautious about our own boundaries too, about what can I do for that person? Well, the things that I'm thinking about at 8 o'clock at night may not be the best boundary setting for myself. If I'm doing that, maybe we need to leave that at home. How can we do that? And then we're going to talk about some more self-care in a little bit. Acting on impulse. We need to make sure that we are grounded in our own stuff, that we're not just reactive, right? Because when we react out of emotion is when we get ourselves in trouble. I've done that before. Not a good idea, right? Sacrificing your personal values, allowing others to take from you. We have a pretty strict policy in our chaplain's office when folks come in. If they ask for food or if they ask for, bus tickets, or, we pass them. If they are patients or family members of patients, we send them to the social worker. Otherwise, we don't have a fund for that, And it's not just take physically from you, but sometimes patients can take emotionally from us. And sometimes that's okay because we pour ourselves into these folks. We pour our very selves. We're all in caring professions in here. And when we have so much compassion for somebody, it's hard sometimes to just release them and say, good luck. I don't have anything else. But we just have to be cautious. And letting somebody else direct you when you are the responsible party. We find this a lot more with families, I think, than with patients. Well, why don't you guys just do this for that person? Or why don't you guys just do that? I don't know if you guys find that with parents much. But if you would just do this, and then when we start saying, oh, well, maybe that's an okay idea, we allow them to do our job. Right? And there's some of that, like if there's a different set of eyes that haven't seen something, but that can become really challenging. We had a family one time on one of our units who 4 out of the 6 children were attorneys, and they all came in for their family meeting with their steno pads and their ties and their suits, and they tried to tell our staff how to do their job, you know, and that's not okay. You know. What are some things that this is this like triggering anything for you guys? Any questions so far? I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning. We're talking about awesome stuff. So, anything that's coming up yet? Okay. If there is, just raise your hand. So when we talk about setting limits, right, these are some myths, and I'm just going to stick this stuff up here, right? So I can make people choose appropriate behavior. That is not true, just in case you wondered. You know, I can become the enforcer. I'm responsible for their behavior. I can only set limits when someone is agitated. You know, let's talk for a second. What does an agitated or an anxious person look like? What are the behaviors that are coming up when you have somebody that becomes anxious or agitated? Crying. Okay. What else? Loud. Uh-huh. Okay. What else? Fidgety. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Could be. Yeah. Yeah. These are all, I mean, we've seen it before, and making sure that you are attuned to what that looks like is really important too. But when somebody becomes agitated, we need to make sure that we talk with somebody and we start with the lowest possible boundary, and if they can't reach that one, then we keep going forward, right? So we want to make sure that if we say to somebody, hey, you know, looks like you're starting to get irritated, or looks like, you know, looks like you are upset about something. Can you talk with me about that, right? So we want to make sure that we don't take it on ourselves, right, and take on these myths, but we begin to move forward to be able to help them set limits and help us set limits. So when we talk about, can you guys see this okay? We haven't done it in this room before. So some of the steps to setting limits. So explain which behavior is inappropriate, right? So if somebody walks into your room and they're like yelling in your face, right? You could say, sir, I need you to not talk to me that way, because it's not okay for you to talk to me that way. It's not okay for you to be yelling in my face. I need you to step back, right? Explain why. So you say, this is the inappropriate behavior, this is why it's inappropriate, and give reasonable choices. You know, for a patient, a lot of times we say for a patient, you know, like if that patient is like, I'm not going to take my medicine, blah, 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 this is what I want, right? You know, you say, all right, well, I know that this is what you want. I need you to get out of my face and sit down so that I can give you your pain medicine. I know that that's what you want. So would you like to sit down and take your medicine, or would you like to go sit in the chair, you know, on the bed or on the chair, you know, whatever. Yeah, and so we want to explain why the behavior is inappropriate, give them choices, and then silence. Silence is not something that is very comfortable for folks most of the time. When we talk about somebody who's already anxious, who's pacing, who's clenching their fists, who's already talking loudly, right? Their brain is actually not functioning in the same way, right? Because we have all of these chemicals in our brain that's causing us to get all upset, right? So it's going to take some time to make logical choices. And it's inappropriate for us to ask a patient or ask a student or ask somebody to make a logical choice when their brain is not in that logical state, right? So to give them time for silence, and you say, you know, you can either do this now, or I can come back in 5 minutes. What would you like to do? And then pause. 30 seconds of silence is a really long time. It seems like a long time. But it's not. And if we are in that state, or if our patients or folks are in that hurried state, it's important to give that space and give that silence for them to actually process their choices, right? And it's important for us to be self-aware, again, that we hold ourselves calm in that state of silence and give that time for them. and then enforce the stated consequences. So if you don't stop yelling, I am going to walk out of the room, and I will be back in a couple of minutes. And if they don't stop yelling, walk out of the room and come back in a couple of minutes. Now, I know that it's not quite that easy, right? I am not a nurse. I'm not a bedside CNA. I'm not a care companion. Sometimes it's not that easy. But that's why we need to make sure that we have the right boundary for the right patient at the right time. So we cannot simultaneously set limits and care for their feelings. Now, I'm a chaplain, so I care for a lot of people's feelings, right? And yes, sometimes setting limits is showing them compassion. But I can't be like, oh, are you okay? Would you please stop yelling in my face? It doesn't quite work that way. So now, mind you, I'm going to tell you a little secret. This slide was written by our head of security, so he and I kind of differ a little bit on that one. I think setting limits sometimes is showing people care. But we cannot be soft and kind with somebody who is not behaving appropriately. We need to set those limits because setting those limits does care for yourself and does care for that person. And ensure the team knows the limits. We've talked about this communications, right? And then document those limits that you set. Do you guys have documentation in the schools? You have that as far as communication? Good. So here are some different ways to actually set these limits, right? So start with a diffuser. I hear what you are saying. That's another perspective, right? What I heard you say is, by reiterating that to that person, they know that you heard them. They know that you understand. And if you reiterate it and they said, that is not at all what I'm upset about, then you can say, okay, let's start over. Let's start over. Because really, most of the time, I have found that when people are really angry, they're not actually angry about the thing that they're saying that they're angry about. There's something else. There's something underneath it. There are families that are hurting because they're seeing their family member decline, and they're pissed about it. And really what it is that they're upset about is the fact that they are dealing with their own anticipatory grief, watching their family member decline. So by reiterating what it is that you hear them saying, what it is that you understand that they want, that validates their concern, which in and of itself sometimes diffuses the entire situation. There was a lady one time that her husband had, I think, 4 heart surgeries in 6 months. And I got called when our surgery OR when our surgery waiting room had not been renovated yet. This lady was in there, and it was this big, long room, and they called me, and they were like, Melissa, we need you. She's about to throw a chair. And I'm like, why are you calling me when she's about to throw a chair? But that's okay. They had security there, right? So we went in, and she said, yeah, she was just pacing, and there was this whole row of chairs there. And I said, what's going on, And she said, well, I didn't get to see him. I didn't get to see him in pre-op. That's when our pre-op was closed to families because of space and things. And she was so angry. And I said, well, tell me about your husband. And as she's sitting there pacing, and I'm pacing back and forth with her, she started to cry, and she said, this may be his last surgery. He may die today. And then she sat down in the chair, and then she started to weep. And it was because, it wasn't because of it was because she couldn't get back, but it wasn't because she couldn't get back. It was because she was afraid she was going to hurt, her husband was going to die. And so by reiterating those things that we hear, we can get down to what it is the actual reason why people are so upset. And then, so if it's somebody a little bit even more anxious than that, and you say, well, what are you angry about? I'm angry because you guys haven't done this, and you haven't done this, and you haven't done this. Okay, so what I hear you saying is that this, and this, right? Okay, well, I have concerns with the way that you are talking, or I have concerns with the fact that you are coming into the other patient rooms looking for your nurse. There's a soft way and a firm way to say that. I have a problem with is a little bit firmer way to say I have concerns with. There are different ways that we can set that boundary. So you say, this is what I hear you saying, and this is the behavior that we are not going to handle, that's not acceptable. It goes back to those 5 things. This is the issue that we have. This is why we have an issue, okay? And then here are your choices. So there are ways to be able to validate that person as well as say, this is the line right here, and this is what you're not going to cross, right? How many of you have set a boundary like this with somebody before? Yeah? How'd that go? You can't think of just... Now it comes second nature. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess one that sticks out in my mind is a patient that she's very manipulative. She's trying to get people to do things for her when she's capable of doing them herself.
Okay.
So it's basically she's like, well, I want you to do this, this, and this. I was like, well, I hear that you want me to do that, but in order for you to get out of here and able to do this yourself, so basically it's
like ambulating or
Yeah.
going to the bathroom or things like that.
like
Mm-hmm.
doing her own ADLs and doing
Mm-hmm.
things. So I have concerns with the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you aren't going to be able to do these things when I'm not here.
Absolutely. That's a great example. That's a great example. So saying, I hear I hear that you want help putting your socks on, but really, in order for you to get out, because your goal and my goal is the same thing, for you to get out of the hospital and you to get better, right? We want you to be able to put your own socks on so that you can get home and you can do it yourself when you get home, right? So one of the important things that when we set limits is to align yourself with that person. What is it that you really want? What is it that you really need? And if they say, I want you to get the heck out of my face. Okay, I can do that, right? That's something that I can do, all right? That's when you gather your support. You find somebody else, and they set the same limits, right? And all right, so what is it that you really need? What is it that you really want? What is it that you really need, right? And when we align ourselves with their goal, that is when we can make magic happen in a way that does not involve security. At least security in the background, right? Not like wrestling to the floor. So communicating those limits, so would you like help, or would you like to do it alone? Sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes it's not. If you have somebody who I don't know, refuses to get dressed, would you like help to get dressed, or would you like to do it by yourself? That doesn't say you don't have the option of, laying there naked is not an option, right? That is not an option. So we need to put clothes on. Would you like help or not? Things like that help to set some of those boundaries too. Do you want to do it now, or do you want to do it in 5 minutes? Or when will you start, yada, yada, right? So some of the limits we've had to set with folks too include like visitors, right? So you can have 2 visitors in your room. Would you like this person and this person in your room right now, or would you like this person and this person? Well, I want them all. Well, that is not an option. So being able to set some really clear limits is important. I hear that you want your family with you, and your family is really important, right? We've had like crazy families, right? So we say to a patient, your family is really important. We know that your family is important, and we want you to have your family there because I know that that's important to you. The way that they're behaving is not acceptable because we want to make sure that you get better. Right? We want you to get better. So aligning yourself with that goal and say, in order for you to get better, we want it quiet in your room as much as possible. So we're going to have 2 people in your room at a time. Who would you like? Things like that. Here's another different way to say it. If you choose to do this, then I will do this, right? These are some if-then, right? If-then statements. I think we're going to talk about in just a second, we'll talk about kind of the if-then and that. But if you choose this, then I'm going to do this. And then make sure you do that thing if they do that thing, right? Or I will do this when you do this, right? I'll give you your pain medicine when you sit down on the bed. Or with students, that is not my realm. I was a youth minister long ago. There's a reason I'm not a youth minister anymore. I love those kids, but they are crazy, right? They are crazy kids. But sometimes they really need some things too, you know. Do you guys have any kind of examples that this is bringing up for you of times that you've had to set limits with kids?
I think in our circumstance, usually administration or security handles
Mm-hmm.
those kind of behaviors. If we're seeing kids for depression and anxiety, panic attacks, suicide ideation,
I see.
it's a little different.
Mm-hmm. Do they ever threaten you or anything like that? Do you guys have any of that? Mm-mm. Yeah.
They're pretty happy to come see us, actually. Yeah.
Good. Good.
You have to set the limit of, can you just see us more often? You need to go to class.
I see.
They're
Yeah.
walking around our office all the time.
Yeah. Well, and maybe it's one of those like, I'll meet you this time, and then why don't we set it for a week, you know? So sometimes with patients, especially on the call light, right? You know, we have patients on the call light all the time sometimes, right? And they want somebody in their room all the time because they're needing something, right? They're lonely, or they're wanting connection, or they need to know that they're not alone, or they're afraid. Maybe they're afraid of what's happening within their own body or within their own self. And so we say, you know what? Okay, have you gone to the bathroom? Do you need anything to drink? Do you need anything to eat? You know, I got your Kleenex over here. Your iPad is connected to your bed. We got that charged up, you know. All right, so if everything is good, I'm going to come back in 20 minutes. Okay, or I'm going to come check in on you in 30 minutes, and you better do it, right? And for you guys, maybe it's, you know, if we've had this really awesome conversation, why don't I see you in 3 days? How about that? How about we make an appointment for 3 days, and you can come and see me in 3 days, right? And that way, we set that limit for them. And then if you do it, then they start to trust that you're going to do it, and they trust that you're there. And then you can say, all right, now that the 20-minute call light thing worked, let's try 30 minutes. Or if you've seen them in 2 days, maybe 3 days, or maybe 4 days is appropriate. And so, you know, making sure that you know. And it's a sense of intuition of how strong you are with somebody setting a limit. You know, you're not going to do it right every time. I'm going to tell you that. You're just not. So some other considerations, you know, making sure that we have positive consequences for it. You know, many times negative consequences don't motivate folks. You know, so aligning yourself with that goal is really important. And setting too many limits. If you're like, all right, here is the 12 things that we have agreed upon for this room, right? That's too much. That's too much. So maybe 2, maybe 3 limits at a time. We're just going to skip that. So one of the things that we want to talk about too is personal safety. Now, this is in regards to mostly patient rooms, right? So we've kind of set this up a lot for the healthcare environment. However, it is still applicable. So when you walk into a room, what are some things that you bring with you that could pose a threat to your personal safety? Stethoscope, okay. Scissors, what else? Sharps, okay. Needles, what else? What'd you say? Badge holder, composer, yeah. This thing, absolutely that could be. What else? Pens and pencils. Mm-hmm. These are the things that I identified. Hair, your hair, whether it's in a bun or if it's down. You know, a water bottle, maybe not a plastic water bottle, but those aluminum water bottles, that would hurt, right? So making sure, you know, too, that we keep ourselves safe in terms of boundaries, you know, and the computer, you know, we've got these computers on wheels, chairs, telephone cords. I mean, there's a million things, right? One of the things that I think that we don't think about enough is something along the lines that is not as much physical. We had a patient up on 8 one time who saw that his nurse was married and started making threats to his wife and his kids. He was video recording on his phone He was I think looking on Facebook for the nursing staff. Different things like that. So if there's ever a time when you want to be really cautious about who knows information about you, even take off that ring. Sometimes take off your necklace. There are all kinds of things. People who want to be manipulative, who want to take advantage, they will use anything and every bit of information that they can against you. So be cautious. That's not to say that every patient is like that, but that's just something to kind of be aware of. Something that we talk in our environment too is about the Vocera. So we've had patients before with the Voceras that we have, they say first and last names. So we have to be really cautious about that. And it is okay to put your Vocera on Do Not Disturb if you are walking into a patient room where that is inappropriate for them to have, first and last names, that you are afraid that something is going to happen to that. We have blessings from our service leaders to be able to do that. Or, it does have a security function, correct? The Vocera has a security function, like a panic button, does it not? The Composer does, okay. Oh, a Vocera, you asking what a Vocera is? Somebody have a Vocera on them? It's just a little, thank goodness we don't have to wear them as chaplains, right? It's a little thing that somebody can say, find Elaine, right? And then it says, Elaine has one and it says, can you take a call from, and then it says my full name. So even though the person in the room, like if Elaine's sitting in the room, that patient may not know her first and last name, but they know mine now. So, that's where we have to be really cautious about that. And it's okay to put that on Do Not Disturb if you're worried about that. Anything else? Like, have there been any instances where you guys were legitimately feeling afraid in a patient room, or with your staff, or with your students? Anything like that? Yeah.
When I'm not a Methodist, I work at the Psychiatric Treatment Center of Boys Town.
Oh,
So we deal with stuff like that a lot. So you always have to know your surroundings and know where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. So you just be aware of everything.
Self-awareness goes beyond just what's going on in your brain and in your heart, right? It goes around to your physical surroundings as well. And that's really important, making sure that you don't back yourself into an office or into a room where you don't have a clear exit. Or if you do, find something that you can put in between you and the person in front of you so that you can distract them if they start to attack you. Things like that are really important to be cautious about. The other thing that we need to talk about is compassion fatigue, because part of setting limits is making sure you're taking care of yourself so that you don't end up here, right? Symptoms of compassion fatigue include anxiety, self-doubt, withdrawal, hypersensitivity, irritability. How many of you feel like you are at a level right now, at a level of compassion fatigue somewhere on there? Anybody? Yeah. Even I am. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in our lives right now, and I think here in the hospital setting, we have had heavy acuity of patients and not that dip that's usually the dip in the summer of the number of patients. So we've continued to have really, really sick patients, and a lot of them. And that tears us down, Or if we have one or two patients that really stick in our craw that we feel like that we can't help, or we didn't do our best, or things like that, that always, it always has the potential for turning into a situation like this if you don't take care of yourself. Part of the reason why we talked about coping skills is because you need to have those coping skills. You need to take time for yourself. My husband and I last week took 2 whole days away from our daughter. It's the first time in 18 months. It was awesome. We went to Nebraska City. We hung out. We walked some trails. We sat in a dive bar and drank $2 beers. It was awesome, right? It was awesome. We just hung out and played darts, right? So we had to do those things. He works in a high-intensity environment. I work in a high-intensity environment. Everybody in this room, in your professions, works in some sort of potentially high-intense environment. So you have to do some things to take care of yourself, because compassion fatigue is real, and you will burn out if you don't take care of yourself. You know, we have to practice that self-care, set those emotional boundaries, but also set those physical boundaries with patients, right? You know, it may suck at the time, but we've got to do that, right? We've got to do that to be able to take care of ourselves. And seek professional assistance if you need it. You know, therapy is okay. We live in a society right now where we still marginalize and there is stigma about going for mental health, right? It is okay. It is okay. Guess what? We are human beings. We are human beings, and sometimes things are too big for us to be able to handle by ourselves, and we need somebody to talk to. How many of you have a spouse that gets what you do? Or a significant other, or somebody at your friend? How many of you have a spouse or a significant other or a good friend who gets what you do? Yeah? Yeah? How many of you are like, no, he has no clue? Yeah. So, you know, making sure that we have somebody in our life, whether it is a friend, whether it is a spouse, whether it's a therapist, you know, find somebody that you can talk to, because we are regulated by this thing called HIPAA. I don't know if you've heard about it, but we can't talk to anybody about all of this stuff, right? So we have to be really cautious about who we talk to, making sure that you as well have that work environment to take, that folks, you know, you guys are there for each other, and that you can support each other through whatever it is that you're dealing with. Anything else? What comments? What questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Talking about like agitated behavior and
Mm-hmm.
set boundaries. So in my job,
Mm-hmm.
students go home, get their grade, get upset, and then they lash out via email.
Okay.
And so it's kind of challenging to set boundaries when you're communicating via email, because you might not see that student for another week or so.
What kind of boundary are you hoping to set with them? Did you guys hear the question? Okay.
Or I guess just setting boundaries with electronic communication, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So,
It seems like it's coming from, you know, they're frustrated about their grade
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. If you're the teacher, you didn't teach me right. That's why I got the grade I got.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and some people, I will tell you, will go on a rant about millennials, right? Yeah. So some people do that. I'm not going to do that. So I will tell you a story that the only time I have ever been written up in my working life was when I used to do payroll for 1,200 nurses. That was my entire job. And I came in at, like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And there was this lady who was late again, but she wasn't really late. She just said she didn't clock in. And so I got on my email and I was like, right, and then send. That was a bad idea, right? So in my action plan, it included Melissa will not respond to email until after 7:30 and after she's had her coffee, right? That was actually written in my action plan. With a student, I think having a conversation about what led up to, you know, I wouldn't necessarily leave it at just email. I would say, you know, if you would like to talk further about this, you can come into my office. Here's the times I'm available, you know, and say, because that removes, we live in this era right now where we can say whatever we want to our computer, and it removes that human component, right? And so by sitting in front of somebody and saying, okay, let's talk about the reason why you got a D, okay? Let's talk about this. Let me show you your paper. Let me show you the syllabus with the expectations for the assignment. This and this don't match up, okay? My parents would say, that's the natural consequences, you know? And part of that is, you know, which you can't really address with them. Like, did you go partying the night before? Did you? What have you done? What have you done for 2 weeks? You have known that this assignment was due since the beginning of the semester because it's right here in your syllabus that you got on day one. So if you were late, that's your own fault. Sorry about your luck, you know? Maybe you should make a better choice. That's not exactly what I would say to them, probably with a little more compassion, but, you know. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would say, is I would take it out of the email realm and say, if you'd like to, you know, it sounds like you're really frustrated about this. Let's talk in person. Here's the times I'm available. That's what I would do. Good question. And if they don't show up, then that is on them. That is absolutely on them. You know, again, that's the natural consequences of their choices. I don't know. That's my take. Anybody else? Is that good? That was good to you? Okay. Whew. Pass that one, right? All right, what other questions do you have? What other comments? Anything else? Yeah. Sure.
Everything you've introduced us, my take on working with the elderly is they're not used to being called on things.
Mm-hmm.
You're not someone to look at them and say, do you want to get dressed now, or do you want to get dressed in 5 minutes? Do you need help?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they're just not,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, okay, they're like everybody. But because they are not used to being called on something or dialoguing back and forth, and I think it's difficult for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit of a communication gap because they've never been called on things
Right.
for all practical purposes.
Right.
And you're young and you don't know what you're really talking about.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, totally.
What do you know? You've not lived life I've lived.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. So, that's just my thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's harder to communicate with them because
Absolutely.
they've not experienced that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is hard. That is hard. And with anybody of any life experience, when they say you don't know what I've been through, you don't know what I've been like, or you know, generationally, you know, I'm not going to talk to an 80-year-old patient the same way that I talk to a 25-year-old patient. It's just not. It's not that way. And so that's where I think, you know, kind of the softness approach to all of those that have more soft and more firm. You know, maybe that's where you do a little more, I don't even like this, but like hand holding with them. Like, tell me a little more compassionate approach. You know, you don't want to get dressed right now. That's okay. I understand. I like to stay in my pajamas till 10 or 11 o'clock too. Let's talk about that. You know, I mean, is there something, you know, what do you need right now? Or, you know, and that's where opening those questions, you know, using those open-ended questions can be really helpful to say, you know, what is it that I can do for you right now then? Or what do you need? Or, you know, you have a doctor's appointment at 10 o'clock. So it's 9 o'clock right now, and your daughter's going to come and get you, or the bus is going to take you to the doctor's appointment in 25 minutes. So we need to get that done. Would you like to, you know, and maybe that's where, you know, when you have a little more firm things, that's when you can bring in the little bit more firm. But I would just take the more compassionate, softer approach. Or folks with cognitive abilities, it's the same, you know, something is similar. So does that help? Well, that's a good thought. Yeah. Yeah.
I used to be surgery liaison and work with families
Uh-huh.
during perioperative, and you really had to be careful. I mean, the soft approach, and one time I said, I didn't really mean to, I know how you feel.
Uh-huh.
Oh, no, you don't know how I feel.
It's true.
You know? And so I understand, you know, what's the better choice. But
Uh-huh.
I said, well, I know how you feel, and
Mhm.
well, I didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a phrase.
Yeah.
But
Well, and we say a lot of things. Humans like to say a lot of things that we are saying to try to help, and sometimes they don't help. And I think I know how you feel is absolutely one of those, because, you know, I don't know what it's like to be a 65-year-old with a spouse that you've been married since you were 18 years old, and they're going into surgery. I don't know what that's like, you know. We say that to try to show compassion and kindness. But I do think, you know, I understand what you're saying, or this is what I hear you saying is a much better, much more effective response sometimes to that. So, yeah, very good. Well, anybody else? Yeah, sure.
Do you have any suggestions for like nurses, like setting limits with physicians?
So the question was nurses setting limits with physicians. Honestly, my honest response is it shouldn't be any different. It should not be any different. Like, so there may have been once that I was sitting and visiting with a patient. Yeah, no, this totally happened. And she was a young lady, and she was dying. She was dying, and her pulmonologist came in and just interrupted the entire conversation. Like, we were at a point where she was just articulating what it meant for her to die. Like the apex of a conversation that a chaplain really wants to get into, right? Because we're tapping into like the deepest part of ourselves. And this physician comes in, and I could have, whatever. So we won't record that one, right? But I said to him, I'm like, we're in the middle of a conversation. Can you come back later? And he was like, nope. I have a time schedule, and I need to talk to her right now. And we're saying this like in front of the patient. So I kindly stepped out, and I addressed him. I waited. I would probably make a different choice later. But I waited outside, and then I said, we were getting to a really important part of the conversation. And I will tell you, most physicians I have had a similar conversation with, something like that, have been receptive. This person was not. But I wouldn't change it. If a physician is like using harsh words with you or verbally attacking you, you don't have to take that. And I guarantee you, Terry Tipton, our CNO, would back you on that, because that is not acceptable. If you are being, I don't want to say verbally abused. That's too harsh, I think, sometimes for some of the conversations with our physicians. But if you are being disrespected in a way, then you do not deserve that, and it's not acceptable. So that's my take, is that I would use this. I would maybe start on the soft side. That's probably a better option. But to hold those limits, because just because somebody has MD at the end of their name does not make them any different than anybody else. They think yeah, no, they are not. They are not. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all.